What if the thing standing between you and a full night's sleep isn't your bladder at all, but a specific muscle almost nobody ever tells men even exists, let alone that it can be trained on purpose? There's a 3-minute routine built entirely around that one muscle, and I only stumbled onto it after 20 years of doctors never once mentioning it. I'm 83, and that 3-minute routine before bed brought my sleep back. In the next few minutes, I'll show you exactly what it is. These days, I sleep through most nights the way I did decades ago, and I've started saying yes to things again that a broken night used to make unthinkable. An early fishing trip with my grandson last month, up before dawn without dreading the day ahead. I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you because I assumed for years there was simply no lever left to pull, and there was one the entire time. I'd accepted broken sleep as a permanent fixture of being over 80. The same unquestioned category as reading glasses or a slower walking pace. Up once or twice most nights, every night, for so long I'd nearly forgotten what an unbroken night actually felt like. I tried adjusting what I ate and drank in the evening, which helped at the margins but never touched the core pattern. I assumed the remaining piece was simply my bladder itself, aging the way everything else ages, with no real lever left to pull. I remember discussing it with my doctor once, framing it exactly that way, in almost those exact words, as an aging bladder, full stop, nothing more specific than that. He nodded along, agreed it was common, and suggested the usual dietary adjustments I'd already tried. Neither of us ever got more specific than bladder, as though the entire lower urinary system were one single undifferentiated organ, rather than a collection of separate, individually addressable parts. Looking back, I genuinely think that vagueness is exactly what let the problem persist for as long as it did. My bladder is aging isn't a diagnosis, it's barely even a real description. But it felt complete enough at the time that neither of us ever thought to push further. I never once considered that a specific muscle, one I could actually train on purpose, might be sitting at the center of the whole problem. Nobody had ever mentioned it in 20 years of appointments, not once, not even in passing, across every single doctor I'd seen in that entire stretch of time. I'd always associated the word exercise with things happening in a gym, weights and machines, and the kind of effort that leaves you sweating and out of breath. It never occurred to me that a muscle relevant to something as ordinary as nighttime bathroom trips could be trained lying quietly in my own bed in the dark, without anyone else ever knowing I was doing it at all. Here's what I eventually learned. There's a muscle called the pelvic floor that supports your bladder, helps control the flow of urine, and can weaken with age, the same way any muscle can weaken from disuse. Unlike most muscles you might think to train, almost nobody tells men this one exists, let alone that it responds to direct, deliberate exercise the same way your arms or legs would. That missing lever is exactly what reframed everything once I found it. This muscle group has been studied directly in clinical trials for exactly this purpose, with measurable outcomes like frequency and urgency, not just vague symptom reports. It's a real, trainable target, not a mystery. For 11 years, the bathroom ran my nights. Up at midnight, up at 2, up again at 5, a weak little stream each time and never quite empty. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, knowing I'd drag through the next day half awake. I thought it was just age. It wasn't. Here's what no one ever sat me down to explain. The prostate crowds the channel your urine runs through, so the bladder never fully drains, it just fills right back up within the hour. That's why you go, and go again. It was never weakness. It was never getting old. And the pills they kept handing me, they left me dizzy every time I stood, gave me that strange, dry finish where almost nothing came, and the nights never changed. But there is a gentle way to help that bladder empty the way it's meant to, without any of that. At 83, I finally sleep through the night again. I'll show you exactly what in this video, and if you want the simple support I personally use, there's a free presentation linked in the description below. So here's the 3-minute routine. Pelvic floor exercises done right before bed. Contract the muscle you'd use to stop urination midstream, hold for a few seconds, release, and repeat for a set of 10 to 15 repetitions. Clinical trials of pelvic floor muscle training in men with urinary symptoms have shown real, measurable improvement in frequency, urgency, and nighttime urination using this exact kind of structured exercise. I want to be very clear that this isn't a passive supplement or something you simply take and forget about. It's an active exercise, requiring the same real consistency you'd bring to any other muscle-building routine, just applied to a muscle group almost nobody ever thinks to actually train. I did it lying in bed, right before turning off the lamp, which meant it fit naturally into a routine I was already doing, rather than becoming one more thing to remember during an already busy day full of other small responsibilities. I added a couple of other pieces around it, cutting caffeine and alcohol in the evening since both work against the same muscle relaxation and bladder control I was trying to support. A short walk most mornings, since general circulation seems to support pelvic floor function alongside the direct exercise itself, working together rather than as isolated, unrelated habits. I gave the routine about 6 weeks before I trusted the improvement was real and not just a lucky stretch. The first couple of weeks felt like nothing was happening at all, honestly, which nearly convinced me to give up before the actual change arrived closer to week 5. I kept a small private tally on my phone, just a tick mark for each night I actually did the routine, mostly to hold myself accountable during those uncertain early weeks when nothing seemed to be changing. Looking back at those first 14 tick marks with no visible result attached to them, I understand now why so many men quit exactly at that point, right before the actual payoff would have arrived. What kept me going, honestly, was pure stubbornness more than any real confidence. I'd committed to giving it a fair, honest trial, and quitting at week 2 felt like it would prove nothing either way. I'd never actually know if it worked or not. That small, private decision to keep going, made almost out of spite toward my own doubt, turned out to matter more than anything else in the entire process. I want to be honest about how strange it felt at first, contracting and releasing a muscle I'd genuinely never once consciously thought about controlling in 83 years of living in this body. It took a few nights just to reliably locate the right muscle at all, let alone train it with any real consistency, fumbling in the dark trying to isolate exactly the right contraction. I actually tightened the wrong muscles entirely the first 2 nights, my stomach and my legs instead of the one that mattered, before I finally understood what the sensation was actually supposed to feel like from the inside. My wife and I took a long weekend trip to visit old friends, sleeping in an unfamiliar guest room both nights, and I slept through completely, something that used to be genuinely unpredictable in a new environment. She mentioned the next morning how rested I looked, which she said she hadn't seen in longer than either of us wanted to admit. I think about a man named Herbert who wrote in, 79, who told me he'd never once heard of the pelvic floor as something a man could deliberately train, assuming it was purely a concept relevant to women after childbirth. He said learning there was real research behind it for men specifically, with actual measured outcomes, was what finally got him to try something that had sounded almost implausible at first. Herbert told me the first 2 weeks felt exactly as uncertain for him as they had for me, and he nearly gave up around the same point I almost had. He said sticking with it past that discouraging stretch, based purely on trusting the research timeline rather than how he felt in the moment, was the hardest and most important part of the whole process. He also told me he'd been too embarrassed to actually tell his own wife what the 3-minute routine was, for the first month at least, letting her assume it was some kind of stretching exercise for his back. He said eventually explaining it honestly, once it had already started working, felt easier than it would have at the start, since he had real results to point to, instead of just an awkward explanation nobody had asked for. Looking back, he told me the secrecy had cost him more anxiety than the exercise itself ever required. If you're on medication for your prostate, your blood pressure, or your heart, please hear this clearly. Nothing here replaces your treatment, and you should never stop or change a medication on your own. Mention this exercise to your doctor, especially if you've had any prior pelvic surgery or specific urological diagnosis, even something as simple sounding as this. What I want you to walk away with is this. Bladder control isn't necessarily a fixed, unchangeable fact of aging. There's a real, trainable muscle behind a good part of it, and almost nobody ever tells men that directly, leaving most of us assuming there's simply nothing left to do. I think about the specific vocabulary gap that let this go unaddressed for so long. Aging bladder is a phrase with no actionable next step attached to it. Untrained pelvic floor muscle is a phrase you can actually do something about, and the fact that almost nobody uses the second phrase with men specifically has real, measurable consequences for how many of us just quietly accept a fixable problem as permanent. I think about all those years assuming there was simply no lever left to pull, when a specific, nameable muscle had been sitting there the entire time, waiting for someone to point at it directly and say, "This one you can actually train." It's a strange kind of relief, finding out the thing you'd written off as permanently fixed was never actually fixed at all, just unnamed and untrained for far longer than it needed to be. So here's what I use: a few drops every single morning. And let me be honest about why it works. One herb on its own nudges one thing, but your prostate answers best when several signals are calmed at the same time: the flow, the emptying, the pressure behind it. That's why what I take brings them together, concentrated, working as one, not a single ingredient hoping to do everything. Stronger stream, full emptying, quiet nights, your freedom back. And none of the trade-offs, no dizziness, no dry finish, nothing taken from you as a man. It's linked right under this video. Go see it for yourself. It won't replace good sleep or your own doctor. It's there to support your body. At 83, I sleep through. It is not too late for you. Think about the man I was, accepting broken sleep as a permanent fixture of being over 80, filing it away next to reading glasses and a slower walking pace. And I think about the man I am now, who found one more lever and pulled it, 3 quiet minutes at a time. If you've ever assumed something about your own body was simply fixed and unchangeable, only to find out later there was an actual lever the whole time, tell me about it in the comments. And if this kind of honest, specific explanation is useful to you, go ahead and subscribe. There's more of this ahead every single week, and I genuinely read every comment myself, tick mark tallies and all.